again, you got me talking out of my lane. I mean,
Hey.
I'm an expert on near-death experiences in the Bible, not...
Let's get back into some near-death experiences. You had spoken about a woman who was in a kayaking incident. I think I'm familiar with this incident. Could you elaborate on what happened there?
Yeah, her name is Dr. Mary Neal. She's a spine surgeon. She was kayaking with her husband and a group of people in Peru. Goes over a 20-foot drop, which she said is not, it's not horrific for kayakers who know what they're doing. But she ended up at an angle where she plunged in, and the force of it pushed her down, and the nose of her kayak got lodged between two boulders under the waterfall. And so she's pinned to the front of her boat. She can't even release her spray skirt because the pounding of the waterfall. And, she did everything she could. She's a surgeon. So she's used to panic situations, and she tried to release herself and pretty soon realized she shouldn't be alive still. And it was interesting because she said, right before that, when she realized she can't free herself, she said, I said, God, your will be done, whatever it is. She just had this kind of surrendered posture to God, your will be done. And she said, what was interesting is I'd always feared a drowning death, like oxygen starvation. That terrified me. And she said, I never felt that. Instead, as soon as she called out to God, she felt Jesus physically holding her. She wasn't even a very strong believer. She'd gone through medical school and kind of wandered away and kind of become more of an agnostic materialist. And so the first time she told me, she was very hesitant. She's like, who am I that Jesus would care about me or be holding me? But she said, but I knew without a doubt. And she's very logical and analytical. And she said, I was fascinated because on the one hand, I'm having this conversation with him, and she's having like this life review, which is another commonality of a near-death experience. She feels better than she's ever felt. This is more real than anything she's ever felt. But she's also aware that her knees are bending backward and breaking. So she realizes
Wow.
she's being like, her legs are, and she can somewhat feel it, but there's no pain in it. And then she feels this kind of like a pop, and boom, she's out of her body, up out of the water, and she's watching her friends panic, swimming around, trying to find her in the waterfall. And then she sees this, what many of them call a welcoming committee of these people. But these people, she said, and by the way, that welcoming committee appears, on the other side, from what I understand, we can appear to each other just like we normally do. Like this one bank president, Marv Besteman, said, yeah, I was in my favorite golf outfit. And the people I saw were in kind of their native garb, or whatever they would like. He saw, people from all countries. And, but sometimes they talk about these, they say they're like robes of white, but it's not robes of white. And it's interesting because that's found in Revelation, I think 3 and 5, somewhere like that, of, which I always thought, I don't want a robe of white, It doesn't sound good. But what I figured out is that they're actually translucent, and there is the light and love and life of God, which fills everything, coming out of them. So that's what Mary said she experienced, these people that she knew, and out of them was bursting this love that was light, welcoming her and greeting her. And she said it was the most joyous occasion. We hugged and we danced, and it was like this big party, this big celebration. And she said, because I knew these people. I had known them for as long as I existed. And then they began going down this path, this beautiful pathway, she said, lined with flowers. She loves flowers. And at the same time, though, she can see what's going on the riverbank. So she's having kind of almost this dual experience. And she ends up at this place, this large structure, and she can see in, and there are people in there, and it's a city. She says it's a city like bustling with life. There was activity. They were all busy doing something. But she said it was almost like there was this momentary, like, stopping to acknowledge and just welcoming. She said, it was amazing. Who am I? I'm nobody. And yet I felt so accepted and so just welcomed in. And at another point, she had an encounter with Jesus, and I asked her, so what did he look like? Right? The question. And she said, this isn't going to make sense, but he looked like bottomless kindness and compassion. And I said, well, what do you mean? She said, well, he had physical features, yes, but what just struck me is just bottomless kindness and compassion. Interestingly, a neurosurgeon, a neurologist that I interviewed, said something like that about standing there in the presence of God, that picture the kindest person you've ever pictured or known. You had to multiply it by thousands. And that's what he experienced, combined with the power of standing 5 feet away from a nuclear explosion. I mean, try to put all that in your head, you know? That's what blows your box open, right?
Yeah.
So Mary, interestingly, she asked Jesus, she said, man, this is so amazing. Like, why don't you give everybody this experience? Everybody would believe. And I love this because he quotes himself. What he said to Dr. Neal is what he said to Thomas, who's called Doubting Thomas. He's the disciple who, when Jesus was resurrected, wasn't there when Jesus first showed up to his followers. And they were telling Thomas, and he's like, I don't believe it. I'm not going to believe it until I stick my finger in the hole in his side. And Jesus shows up again, and he says, you know, hey, Thomas, touch me. See, I'm not a ghost. I'm physical. He eats fish with them. You know, they touch him. So he says, stick your hand in and see, I'm real. And then Jesus said to Thomas, blessed are you because you have seen, but even more blessed are those who have believed and yet not seen. And that's what he said to Mary. Which is like, I love that. Jesus quoting himself.
Yeah. Wow.
So she comes back and, I mean, it completely changed her. She was a materialist doctor, you know?
Is she the one who also was told that her son would die?
Yes. So when she came back, so she didn't want to come back. So this is another commonality of near-death experiencers. What they've told me is when you are in God's presence, you are with your best friend, the greatest dad you could ever imagine, and love that doesn't even compare to the most wonderful spouse or romantic lover, which sounds bizarre, but God's not a male or female. We're created in his image, not him and ours. I use him. The Bible uses him, but it says male and female created in his image. So, yeah, I mean, they don't want to come back. So she didn't want to come back, and she was fighting. This is another thing I love, Shawn, is that people in God's presence are themselves. Their same sense of humor, their same, whatever things about them they had. And many times they argue with him, and he gets it. He understands us. So she was very stubborn about it. Like, I am not going back. She had 2 little kids at the time, and she loved her kids. but that's how great it is. And that's common. And so he said to her, look, your son is not going to make it past age 18, or he's going to die at age 18 or something like that. And your family's going to need you to get through that. And then she came back. And at first, she tried to disprove her own near-death experience. She's like, that felt so real, but I want it to not be real because of what she was told was going to happen. And, but searching all the records of what happened to her and everything, and then hearing about others too, and she realized, no, it's real. And she didn't talk about it because, one, and she didn't write about it at first because how do you say to your kids, yeah, I didn't want to come back for you?
Yeah.
That's what she told me. I couldn't explain that to them. And then she had a time when her son was probably 16 or 17. And there was something they were talking about, when he's married and 30 or 40 and has kids of his own and all that. And he looked at her and he said something like, Mom, I'm not going to live that long. And she was like, it really struck her. But
can you say that again? Her son said
her
that?
son kind of knew somehow that he wasn't going to live that long. And so then, sure enough, it was right after he was 18, and he was hit by a car and killed. And I'll tell you, an interesting thing, Shawn, is Mary. Mary is a friend of mine, and she told me, and my wife Kathy, I know how wonderful it's going to be in the life to come. And I know how good God is, and I saw how his plan works together. It all works together, and it makes sense in the end, but it doesn't take away a mother's grief. It doesn't take away your grief for your friend you lost.
Yeah.
You still have to go through that. And it was hard for her.
I'll bet it was. Are there any other maybe real prophecies that you've seen come out of a near-death experience?
Like foreknowledge of things?
Yeah, or maybe even in the past.
Yes, I find that those who've had near-death experiences, it's almost like whatever the veil is that separates us, kind of in our two-dimensional painting from being able to see into the realm around us, is thin for them when they come back initially. After a while, it seems to then kind of the fog settles in again. And so sometimes, they have premonitions of things that are going to happen before they happen.
Any other specific examples? I'll bring something up. I don't know how true this all is. It was like I had mentioned. I had watched Case for Heaven that you're in, and then that sent me down a near-death experience rabbit hole. And I found it was a Hollywood movie, and it was talking about a kid that got really sick, had a near-death experience on the operating table, I believe, and saw Jesus, was able to tell his parents that he had a sibling that didn't make it past pregnancy. And he just had, this little kid had all these examples of things that had happened before he came around, or that he was too young.
Was this Colton Burpo?
It may have been.
Was his father a pastor?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yes.
so he's in my book, Imagine Heaven.
Okay.
Yeah, so what was the question?
Well, his son had knowledge of things that he shouldn't have had knowledge of.
Oh, yeah.
From things that happened before he was born, or maybe when he was too young to understand.
Right.
Things
so,
like that. And so that's why I'm asking, are there knowledge of, do you see a lot of knowledge from people that have had NDEs, knowledge into the future or knowledge into the past that they could not have known?
Yeah. So, the 10 points of evidence that I put in Imagine the God of Heaven, just that's chapter 2, kind of to set the framework for why I believe these. So the verifiable observations is one, but another one is encountering people on the other side that they didn't know were dead. And Colton Burpo would be an example of that. So he is a 4-year-old kid who basically they thought they lost him on the operating table. His dad is a pastor. So his dad goes into the closet in the hospital and he is screaming at God. He's so mad, and because he's it's true of all of us. We're like, wait, I served you and you're going to take my son? What is going on? And he was mad. He was angry. Colton, meanwhile, this 4-year-old, said that he was there with Jesus, and there were angels that were basically entertaining him while he was waiting, because Jesus said, you're going to have to go back. Your time isn't finished yet, which is a common thing that he'll say, is that you still have a purpose, or your time isn't done yet. And he sees his dad in that closet yelling at God. And he when he comes back, he told them that he saw him in there, and that Jesus told him, we need to pray for your dad right now. He's struggling. And so his son was praying for him in this struggle he's having with his own faith. And then Colton also, he said lots of things. One is he said, when he comes back, he said, Jesus had markers. And his dad was like, markers? What do you mean? You mean like markers like you write with? And he said, yes, he had markers right here and here. And then he realized, oh, he's got wounds. It's like if you put a marker dot.
Wow.
So there's a 4-year-old trying to describe the wounds in Jesus' wrists that near-death experiencers commonly say.
That's a commonality.
I have a Rwandan imam. Well, I'll have to tell that one.
Okay.
But we'll come back to that one. But what Colton also said, so this 4-year-old comes back and he's talking to, and this is coming out over time, right? Because he's a 4-year-old. He doesn't know what he
doesn't even realize that this isn't
normal, or yeah. I mean, it all came out in the car when they're driving along, and they drive by the hospital, and Colton says, that's where the angels sang to me. And it's a funny story. He said, and the father's like, what are you talking about? And he starts asking questions, and he said, yeah, the angels sang to me. When did the angels sing to you? When I was sitting on Jesus' lap. When were you sitting on Jesus' lap? That when you were yelling at God in that closet. He's like freaking out. Like, how did my 4-year-old son know I was in a closet yelling at God? Wow. So, and then along the way, Colton said, I met my sister. And they said, you don't have a sister. I said, yes, I met my sister. And she wanted me to tell you she's waiting for you. And then they realized they had had a miscarriage, but they had never told their 4-year-old son. And he told them it was a girl, and she was waiting for them. Now, that's not uncommon either, where you have a sibling. There was another one in Finland, I believe, who this little girl dies, meets her sister, Reggie, on the other side, comes back and shares with her parents that she met Reggie, and they leave the room. They freak out because Reggie had died of accidental poisoning when she was like 2, before this little girl was ever born.
Wow.
How'd she know that? So, you've got verifiable observations. You have people seeing and, meeting people on the other side they shouldn't have known, or that they didn't know was dead yet. And when they come back, they find out they died. You have this one blows me away. You have blind people.
Is it blind? We'll pick up on blind people and the Rwandan woman. Is it always lineage that people are welcomed by?
No, but a lot of the time.
Why do you think it's always lineage?
Because family matters to God. He put us in families for a reason. And it's not just our immediate family, it's ancestors.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also friends. I mean, the bank president, Marv Besteman, said 2 of his friends that they met together and prayed together regularly, and they were important in each other's spiritual lives. They were there. So I think it's the people that God knows would mean the most to us. We meant the most to them. Karina Martinez, who died in COVID. This is all new to her. And her pacemaker fails. She's young, but she had to get a pacemaker because they misdiagnosed a heart issue. Anyway, she's floating up above her body. She sees her husband there. She's like, oh my gosh, am I dead? She grew up in Colombia, so in the Catholic Church, but horrific past. Her parents abandoned her, and she went down the road doing everything you could to just prove she was worth something. Just use your imagination. And she's realizing, oh my gosh, I'm dead. And she said, and God is real. She said she just had this instant realization. And she starts saying the Our Father that she had learned. But when she comes to Father, forgive me, she was like, I meant it. I was like, I realized. And she just started saying, forgive me, forgive me, forgive me. But she was headed to hell. And she knew it. And then an arm grabs her and turns her around and brings her up, and she's going up into this light, and she sees all these people, and she hears this voice that she knows is the voice of God, and it said, come, you're home, come. And she said, no, I can't. I'm filthy, I'm horrible, I deserve hell. Send me back there, that's what I deserve. And this is common too, is that in God's presence, it's like the truth is the truth. It's like we can hide and pretend and rationalize and justify and all that, but there you don't. And so they commonly say, God was not judging me, I was judging myself. Which is interesting because Jesus once said, by your own words will you be acquitted, by your own words will you be condemned. And Jesus said, I didn't come into the world to condemn the world. I came into the world that through me, the world might be saved or rescued. And so she cries out anyway. She's going up into this light. She sees all these people and they're like celebrating her. And she's like, me? Why are they celebrating me? And she said, I'm filthy. I deserve that. And he says, no, you're worthy. Come. I love you. And she still is. See, and this is the thing that's amazing, Shawn. We're ourselves. We don't just boom change instantly from ourselves when we cross over. That's why how we live our lives today matters, because we're becoming something that continues on. And so here's Jesus trying to encourage her. She's worthy. And what she later realized is that she had just asked his forgiveness, and that's all it took. That's all it takes, is just wanting him, wanting his forgiveness, wanting his love, wanting his guidance. That's all it takes. You don't have to be perfect. Anything can be forgiven, anything. And she was still hesitant. She said, God, if it really is okay, if it really is safe, show me someone who's gone before me that I love. And he said, look to your right. So she looks to her right, and there is her dog that died the week before, and her other dog that had died like 3 years earlier. And then she knew. And And in she goes and has this amazing experience. Amazing. I don't even go into more of it, but just the beauty and the joy and the excitement of it all. And she was like, let me go back. I want to tell everybody. And that's what she's been doing since 2020. I got to kind of calm her down a little bit because she's a little over the top. Sometimes she's so enthusiastic, you know?
Why don't you want to go deeper into what you saw? Or do you want to do that later?
We can later. But what I was going to point out is that the people that welcome us sometimes are our relatives, sometimes are our friends, but in her case, it was her pets.
Interesting.